What if the greatest danger to humanity wasn't evil, but ordinary people mindlessly following orders? Hannah Arendt uncovered a terrifying truth, one that cost her friendships, sparked global outrage, and still haunts us today. She was a refugee, a philosopher, a journalist, and a rebel, a woman who refused to fit into any box, who challenged power at every turn, and who left behind ideas that continue to shape the world today. But despite her fame as a political theorist, few truly know the astonishing life she led. Her early struggles, her unexpected love affair with a Nazi sympathizer, her dramatic escape from the Gestapo, and her radical ideas that made even her closest friends turn against her. This is the story of Hannah Arendt, the woman who made the world rethink what it means to be free, what it means to be evil, and what it means to resist. Hannah Arendt was born in 1906 in Königsberg, Germany, a city that no longer exists on the map. From an early age, she had a mind that refused to conform. She asked too many questions. She read books meant for adults before she was even a teenager. And most of all, she was not afraid to challenge authority. At just 14 years old, she was expelled from school for questioning her teachers. Instead of apologizing, she left without looking back. Arendt was not just a brilliant student, she was a rebel. And rebels, as history shows, are the ones who change the world. Determined to study philosophy, she enrolled at the University of Marburg, where she met the man who would change her life forever, Martin Heidegger. Martin Heidegger was a rising star in German philosophy, and Arendt was captivated by his ideas. But soon she became captivated by something else, the man himself. They began a secret affair. She was 18, he was 35. He was married, and he had power. And Hannah? She had fallen in love. But love can be blinding. What Hannah did not know was that her mentor, the man she admired most, would soon swear allegiance to Adolf Hitler. When Hitler came to power in 1933, Heidegger joined the Nazi Party. He gave speeches praising the Führer. He turned against his Jewish colleagues, and worst of all, he never regretted it. For Arendt, this was more than just personal betrayal. It was a realization. Even the most brilliant minds could become corrupted by ideology, and it was this realization that would shape her greatest work. In 1933, the Gestapo arrested Hannah Arendt. Her crime? Gathering evidence of Nazi persecution against Jews. If she had not escaped, she would have been sent to a concentration camp, or worse. With nothing but a suitcase, she fled to Paris. But Paris was only a temporary refuge. When the Nazis invaded France, she had to run again, this time to America. She arrived in New York in 1941 as a stateless refugee, a woman with no country and no home. But what she did next changed history. 2 decades later, in 1961, Arendt covered one of the most shocking trials of the century, the trial of Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi bureaucrat who had sent millions to their deaths. But what she saw was not a monster, not a sadistic killer, just a man in a gray suit, an ordinary bureaucrat who claimed he was just following orders. And then it hit her. Evil is not always radical. Sometimes it is shockingly ordinary. Sometimes it is just a person, mindlessly obeying, refusing to think. This she called the banality of evil. The world expected a monster, but what they got was a man who seemed disturbingly normal. Arendt's theory was terrifying because it suggested that anyone, your neighbor, your colleague, even you, could become part of a machine of destruction simply by refusing to think critically. Evil, she argued, thrives on obedience. Her book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, was a sensation, but it also made her a target. The publication of Eichmann in Jerusalem triggered an outrage that Arendt never anticipated. She thought she was exposing a truth, but instead, she was accused of justifying Eichmann's crimes, of diminishing the horror of the Holocaust, and even of betraying her own people. Even her closest friends turned against her. The Jewish intellectual community, who once admired her, now saw her as a traitor. Letters poured in, filled with hatred. Invitations to conferences were rescinded. For the first time in her life, the woman who had always been an outsider found herself completely isolated. Critics accused her of being cold, detached, lacking emotion. They claimed she had reduced genocide to an intellectual exercise rather than an atrocity that must never be rationalized. But Arendt was never interested in emotional narratives. She sought the truth, no matter how painful, and the truth was that the world needed to confront how easily evil hides behind obedience. But Arendt refused to apologize. She had seen something others were too afraid to admit. Evil doesn't always come in the form of dictators or madmen. It often hides behind bureaucracy, in ordinary ordinary people who stop questioning orders. And if we fail to recognize this, history will repeat itself. As she grew older, Arendt became more convinced that the greatest threat to democracy wasn't tyranny, it was apathy. It was the slow erosion of critical thinking, the willingness to let others decide what is right or wrong, the acceptance of lies simply because they are convenient. She warned that societies do not collapse overnight. Instead, they erode gradually as people trade critical thinking for blind trust, as they choose silence over confrontation, and as they embrace comfort over responsibility. The moment we allow ourselves to stop questioning authority, we open the door for oppression to creep in unnoticed. History is filled with examples of this. From the rise of totalitarian regimes to modern authoritarian movements, the pattern remains the same. Citizens disengage, and power is consolidated in the hands of the few. Arendt feared that future generations would ignore this lesson, mistaking democracy for something permanent rather than something that must be actively protected. In her last years, she warned us, the moment we stop thinking for ourselves, we hand over power to those who will think for us, and they will not always have our best interests at heart. But are we still listening? Or are we once again letting history repeat itself? Because evil does not arrive with a warning. It does not announce itself as tyranny. It comes disguised as bureaucracy, efficiency, and order. It asks nothing of you but silence, and in that silence it thrives. Our channel is just starting out, and every new subscriber is a building block in its foundation. If Hannah Arendt's story inspired you, please subscribe and hit the bell to motivate us to create more videos.